Okay, so I'm going to read to you a bit from Shobo Genzo Showaku Makusa, which is Not Doing Wrongs. This is the Nishijima Cross translation. If you shouldn't watch my YouTube videos, but if you watch my YouTube videos, you may have seen me read from my version of this called Don't Be a Jerk yesterday. But I decided I didn't want to read from that version. I want to read from a better version, which is the Nishijima Cross translation. So here goes. The Eternal Buddha says, not to commit wrongs, to practice the many kinds of right, naturally purifies the mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. This teaching, as the universal precept of the ancestral patriarchs, the seven Buddhas, has been authentically transmitted from former Buddhas to later Buddhas, and later Buddhas have received its transmission from former Buddhas. This is not only of the seven Buddhas, it is the teaching of all the Buddhas. We should consider this principle and master it in practice. These words of Dharma of the seven Buddhas always sound like words of Dharma of the seven Buddhas. What has been transmitted has been received one-to-one. Let's try that again. What has been transmitted and been received one-to-one is just clarification of the real situation. Okay, here's a footnote there, but I'm going to ignore it. At this concrete place. This already is the teaching of the Buddhas. It is the teaching, practice, and experience of hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands of Buddhas. In regards to the wrongs, that's shoaku, as in showaku makusa, the wrongs, which we are discussing now, amongst rightness, wrongness, and indifference. The indifference is a very difficult to translate word that just means things that are neither right nor wrong. Among rightness, wrongness, and indifference, there is wrongness. Its essence, and essence is its sho, which is its isness. Its essence is just non-appearance. And Nishijima Roshi's footnote for this says, in this sentence, Master Dogen begins his conceptual explanation of right and wrong by introducing the idea of instantaneousness. Non-appearance, musho, describes the state at the moment of the present. So that's what non-appearance means. Its essence is just non-appearance. The essence of rightness, the essence of indifference, and so on are also non-appearance. They are the state without excess. And that state without excess is a translation of the word muro, which means without leakage, and it's based on Sanskrit terms and suggests the state in which things are as they are. That's the state without excess. So no ideas about the state, just the state itself. And our real form. At the same time, at each concrete place, these three properties, rightness, wrongness, and indifference, include innumerable kinds of dharmas. In wrongs, there are similarities and differences between wrong in this world and wrong in other worlds. There are similarities and differences between former times and latter times. There are similarities and differences between wrong in the heavens above and wrong in the human world. How much greater is the difference between moral wrong, moral right, and moral indifference in Buddhism and in the secular world? I'm going to read that again. How much greater is the difference between moral wrong, moral right, and moral indifference in Buddhism and in the secular world? They're quite different. Right and wrong are time. Time is not right or wrong. So when he says right and wrong are time, that means that every action you take produces time. It's not that you do something and time is the stage on which you do it. Time comes into existence based on your action in the here and now. and every action you take reverberates and lasts forever and is extremely important. Right and wrong are time. Time is not right or wrong. Right and wrong are the Dharma. The Dharma is not right or wrong. When the Dharma is in balance, wrong is in balance. And the footnote there goes, it's hoto akto, or Dharma in equilibrium, bad in equilibrium, suggests the balanced state in which a bad fact is seen as it is. When the Dharma is in balance, wrong is in balance. When the Dharma is in balance, right is imbalanced. This being so, when we learn the supreme state of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, which is unsurpassed, complete, perfect enlightenment, when we hear the teachings, do training, and experience the effect, it is profound, it is distant, and it is fine. Next paragraph. We hear of this supreme state of Bodhi sometimes following good counselors, that's teachers, and sometimes from following sutras. At the beginning, the sound of it is, do not commit wrongs. If it does not sound like do not commit wrongs, it is not the Buddha's right Dharma. It may be the teachings of demons. Remember, teaching that sounds like do not commit wrongs is the Buddha's right Dharma. This teaching, do not commit wrongs, was not intentionally initiated and then intentionally maintained in its present form by the common man. So this is not something that people made up. This is not something that we invented for ourselves. This is something that exists naturally. When we hear teaching that has naturally become the preaching of Bodhi, that's enlightenment, it sounds like this. What sounds like this is the speech which is the supreme state of Bodhi in words. It is Bodhi speech already, and it speaks Bodhi. Bodhi, again, is enlightenment, Bodhi, as in Bodhisattva. When it becomes the preaching of the supreme state of Bodhi, and when we are changed by hearing it, we hope not to commit wrongs. We continue enacting not committing wrongs, and wrongs go on not being committed. In this situation, the power of practice is instantly realized. This realization is realized on the scale of the whole earth, the whole world, the whole of time, and the whole of Dharma. So that's everything. What you do is everything. And the scale of this realization is the scale of not committing. For people of just this reality, at the moment of just this reality, even if they live at a place and come and go at a place where they could commit wrongs, even if they face circumstances in which they could commit wrongs, and even if they seem to mix with friends who do commit wrongs, wrongs can never be committed at all. The power of not committing is realized, and so wrongs cannot voice themselves as wrongs, and wrongs lack an established set of tools, and the tools are us. And Nishijima Roshi's footnote is, Master Dogen emphasizes that if we do not do wrong, there can never be any wrong. There is the Buddhist truth of taking up at one moment and letting go at one moment. Ichinen ippo, literally one pinch, one release. That's his footnote. Symbolizes positive action and whatever. It doesn't matter. Forget that footnote. Too complicated and linguistic. At just this moment, the truth is known that wrong does not violate a person, and the truth is clarified that a person does not destroy wrong. And his footnote says, Master Dogen denies the idea that something exists that can be called wrong, bad, or evil outside of our own conduct. When we devote our whole body, When we devote our whole mind to practice, and when we devote the whole body to practice, there is 80 or 90% realization, and usually that means full realization. That's just his weird way of saying that, of not committing wrongs, just before the moment, and there is the fact of not having committed just behind the brain. That means in the present and in the past. When you practice by garnering your own body and mind, and when you practice by garnering the body and mind of anyone or everyone, it's the actual word is tare, who, you, who, doesn't matter. The power of practicing with the 4 elements and 5 aggregates is realized at once. But the 4 elements and 5 aggregates do not taint the self. All things, even the 4 elements and 5 aggregates of today, carry on being practiced, and the power which the 4 elements and 5 aggregates have as practice in the present moment makes the 4 elements and 5 aggregates as described above into practice. This is Nishijima Roshi's footnote. In this sentence, Master Dogen suggests the oneness of concrete circumstances and Buddhist practice. When we cause even the mountains, rivers, and the earth, and the sun, moon, and stars to do practice, the mountains, rivers, and the earth, the sun, moon, and stars, in their turn, make us practice. This is Nishijima Roshi's footnote. This sentence also suggests the mutual relation between a Buddhist practitioner and nature in a more poetic style. I think it's a little more than that. This is not a one-time I. I means realization or understanding. It is vigorous eyes at many times. This is not a one-time eye. It is vigorous eyes at many times. This is Nishijima Roshi's footnote to that. The Buddhist view is not a once and for all realization, but it appears vigorously at many times. Because those times are moments in which the eye is present as vigorous eyes, they make the Buddhas and patriarchs practice, make them listen to the teachings, and make them experience the effect. So that's what you're doing when you do the right thing. The Buddhas and the patriarchs have never made the teachings, practice, and experience tainted, and so the teachings, practice, and experience have never hindered the Buddhas and the patriarchs. For this reason, when teaching, practice, and experience compel the Buddhist patriarchs to practice, there are no Buddhas or patriarchs who flee before the moment or after the moment, in the past, present, or future. And I'm going to skip ahead and just read you a little bit of a greatest hits of the rest of the chapter. If wrongs are in balance, all dharmas are in balance. Those who recognize that wrongs arise from causes and conditions, but do not see that these causes and conditions are they themselves, are the reality of not committing. Sorry, let me try that again. Those who recognize the wrongs, one more time. Those who recognize that wrongs arise from causes and conditions, but do not see that these causes and conditions and they themselves are the reality of not committing, are pitiful people. So you can always make an excuse and say, I'm doing the wrong because of this bad thing that happened to me in the past, or my condition, or how this thing was. You are those causes and conditions. You are those causes and conditions. And if you want those causes and conditions to do right, you can make them do the right thing. The seeds of Buddhahood arise from conditions, and, this being so, conditions arise from the seeds of Buddhahood. It is not that wrongs do not exist. They are nothing other than not committing. It is not that wrongs exist. They are nothing other than not committing. Wrongs are not immaterial. They are not committing. Wrongs are not material. They are not committing. Wrongs are not committing. They are nothing other than not committing. And Nishijima Roshi's footnote there is, Master Dogen emphasized that wrong is only the problem of not doing wrong. And skipping ahead again, when the state has become like this already, even the regret that I have committed wrong... Try it again. When the state has become like this already, even the regret that I have committed what was not to be committed is also nothing other than energy arising from the effort not to commit. I'm going to read that again because that's a good line. When the state has become like this already, even the regret that I have committed what was not to be committed is also nothing other than the energy arising from the effort not to commit. And this one's neat. It is not that causes are before and effects are after. Rather, causes perfectly satisfy themselves, and effects perfectly satisfy themselves. When causes are in balance, the Dharma is in balance, and when effects are in balance, the Dharma is in balance. And I came across this line that Alan Watts wrote about cause and effect that I thought was good, and I can't find it. But it's something like, if you were looking at a cat passing by, through a fence, through the slats in the fence, you'd see the head, then you'd see the body, then you'd see the tail. And you might get the idea that the head caused the tail, because that's what you see first is the head, and then you see the tail. But what you're really seeing is one cat. And that's how cause and effect are. It's not that causes are before and effects are after. They're one whole piece. So what you do in this moment is supremely important. And here's my Ichiban #1 favorite line in this whole piece that I paraphrased on the back of Don't Be a Jerk. Even if wrong upon wrong pervade the whole universe, and even if wrongs have swallowed the whole Dharma again and again, there is still salvation and liberation in not committing. Dogen also goes on to say, near the end of this piece, that if you penetrate one teaching, you penetrate all teachings. And he again emphasizes the idea that all of the teachings of Buddhism are contained in this phrase, showaku makusa, don't commit wrong. And I don't know, I can nerd out a little bit linguistically for whatever it's worth. I've lost my place, so I can't show it to you now. Showaku makusa in Chinese characters there. This is Nishijima Roshi's notes. Sho means many or miscellaneous. Aku means wrong or bad. Maku means not or don't. And sa means to do. So Dogen liked to title his chapters of Shobo Genzo with either 2 or 4 Chinese characters. It's a kind of a Japanese thing, and it sort of makes sense if you're Japanese and writing in Chinese characters, the number of characters that you use. And so in order to make this work, he says sho-aku, which is linguistically interesting because Japanese doesn't have true plurals. So no, words are just not plural or singular in Japanese. They could be either. And in order to make a word a plural, you have to add something to it, like either a number or in this case, that character sho, which means miscellaneous or many. So it makes it into a plural like we have in English, which, like I said, doesn't exist in Japanese. And that makusa is just to make or to do. It actually looks more like make to me because that's the character we used in Seisakubu, which was the production department of the company I worked for. So to make something. And that is interesting because he could have used the character gyo, maybe. I don't know how that would work linguistically, which would mean more like the English word to do. So he might be emphasizing the fact that we make the world by making what we do. And this is one of the the reason I come back to this chapter again and again, there are certain chapters in Dogen's Shobo Genzo that are personally really important to me, and Shoaku Makusa is one of them, Uji is one of them, Inmo is one of them. Anyway, there's a few others. There's a few things that I kind of think of as greatest hits, and they're mostly contained within those 2 Dogen books I did, Don't Be a Jerk and It Came from Beyond Zen. The reason I feel this one so much is I think it's supremely important and also very hard. It's one that for a lot of my practice I've resisted. One teacher I saw, I think this was Tonen O'Connor, said this at a retreat. I'm not sure if she's the one who said it or somebody else, but that's who I remember saying it. And she was saying, you can't decide to be just a little bit bad. You can't decide to just commit a small breach of the precepts. You either breach the precepts, break the precepts, you either do wrong or you don't do wrong. And each time that you give yourself an excuse to do wrong, doesn't matter. Karma doesn't care about your excuses. It doesn't listen to your reasoning. It's not a jury who is going to give you a pass because you had a bad time and then that's why you kicked the dog, or you read a political tweet and that's why you set fire to the McDonald's, or whatever it is. It doesn't listen to that kind of bullshit. It is what it is, and it's a very firm line. And that firm line is not something that's created by religion or by some kind of set of precepts that humans have created. It's something much more absolute and much more profound. And one of the things that we are doing here in this project called humanity is that we have, I almost said unique. I don't know if it's a unique ability, but it is a rare ability, I would say, to understand the rightness and wrongness of our own actions. And because of this, we have a duty to avoid what's wrong and to practice what's right. As Dogen admits in there, sometimes right and wrong look different depending on the time and place, but the similarity is a similarity all of us, without exception, without any exception, without a single exception on the entire earth, know for ourselves when we do an action. There is no time, there's no place, there's no person, there's no set of circumstances which prevents a person from knowing right from wrong. It's only a kind of deliberate ignorance that does that. And it's a deliberate going against what is right and what is obvious. And it's one of the reasons I practice Zazen. I was going to say one of the reasons we practice Zazen, but I don't know everyone's reasons. But I practice Zazen in order to clarify this. Because as I've practiced, this line between right and wrong has become more and more clear, and sometimes frustratingly so and frighteningly so, to the point where I have to finally admit for myself that all my excuses in my entire life for doing things that were not right were all bullshit. Were all just a matter of greed, hatred and stupidity manifesting itself, and providing what at the time seemed like a clever excuse to do what internally I understood to be incorrect. It's also different, he says in there, between the secular world and the Buddhist world. That's why I read that line twice. There are things that the secular world will give people a pass for, and we can get caught up in that, and we can start to believe that and go, oh yeah, well, yeah, of course, because it's it's this and that and the other thing, and I had this, and the Buddhist world isn't like that. When we enter into this sort of practice, we're making a commitment to something that is much harder edged, I think, than the fuzzy little excuses that the secular world will allow for us and give us a pass for. So even if all your friends say, oh no, that was fine, you had a good reason to be like that, that's okay, pat you on the back, good, just don't worry about it. They don't know. Only you know for sure what you did. And if we want this thing to work out, we have to be very strict with ourselves. And I'm going to read my favorite line again, because I think it's useful. Even if wrong upon wrong pervade the whole universe, and even if wrongs have swallowed the whole Dharma again and again, there is still salvation and liberation in not committing. So, no matter what the circumstances are that would, that would give you a pass for not doing right, your commitment is to doing right anyway. He says kind of the same thing earlier in the passage. Let me read the other version of it, because he says it's sort of the same thing in different words. For people of just this reality, at the moment of just this reality, even if they live at a place and come and go at a place where they could commit wrongs, even if they face circumstances in which they could commit wrongs, and even if they seem to mix with friends who do commit wrongs, wrongs can never be committed at all. They can never be committed at all unless somebody does them. So this is also an interesting take on the so-called problem of evil. And yesterday I was trying to write about this, so I looked up Wikipedia's entry on the problem of evil. I think maybe there's a few things Wikipedia can get right, and I figured maybe they could get the problem of evil right. And the problem of evil is something that came up when I was briefly a philosophy student and studying Western philosophy, because in Western philosophy, influenced by Christianity, you have this problem where God is supposed to be all good and all powerful, and yet evil exists in the world, and so how can that be? And you can only get around that in certain ways. You have to either say, well, God allows evil to sort of test us, so he can see who chooses to do evil and not choose it, doesn't choose to do evil, and then he can send the good ones to heaven and the bad ones to hell. The Gnostics had the idea that there was God, and then there was a sub-God who created this world, so there was the real God, but then this sub-God who was twisted and deranged created this world, and that's why there's evil in it. You can be an atheist and just say, well, the problem is evil. There's no God, so there's nothing good, and it's just a dog-eat-dog world, and we just have to get by any way we can, and there's no evil. But what Dogen says here is that evil isn't something that sits around waiting for people to do it. Evil comes into the world when we do the wrong thing. And the only way to prevent evil from coming into the world is by refraining from doing the wrong thing. And we do that by working on ourselves, doing difficult work on ourselves to be able to see when we are doing the wrong thing. And it's not easy, you know. The Zen project is not a kind of an easy way to go, where you can sort of defer to somebody else and, you know, let somebody else take on your sins, or just be kind of lazy about it. It requires real practice, and that's what we did this morning, and what I will be doing again later on today, because I've become a fanatic lately about Zazen, and am insisting on doing it even more than I ever did before on a regular basis, because I think the problem is so urgent and so necessary to address. And the only one I can address it to is myself. As I said at the beginning, let me read that bit that I pulled up at the beginning again before we sat. This is Erwin Schrödinger of Schrödinger's cat fame. It is not possible that this unity of knowledge, feeling, and choice, which you call your own, should have sprung into being from nothingness at a given moment not so long ago. Rather, this knowledge, feeling, and choice are essentially eternal and unchangeable and numerically one in all people, nay, in all sensitive beings, but not in this sense that you are a piece of an eternal infinite being, in an aspect or modification of it, as in Spinoza's pantheism. For we should have the same baffling question: which part, which aspect are you? What objectively differentiates it from the others? No, but inconceivable as it seems to ordinary reason, you, and all other conscious beings as such, are all in all. Hence, this life of yours, which you are living, is not merely a piece of the entire existence, but is in a certain sense the whole. Only this whole is not constituted that it can be surveyed at one single glance. And let me read that Uchiyama quote. Dogen Zenji uses the expressions jinchi, jinkai, jinji, jipo, which would mean the whole earth, the whole world or universe, all of time, and the whole of the Dharma. Jin means all or thorough or exhaustive. This is his way of emphasizing the sense of inclusivity. Applying the principle to myself, it means that I am living my life as all things and worlds. And when I die, all things and worlds die with me. This emphasizes really the importance of what we are doing. And it probably sounds crazy to say, but everything that we do, even in a small way, is the universe, is this whole place that we are living, is the sun and moon and stars and the room and that dog sleeping over there and this cup of water. It's all of it. And it is our duty to make the best of it that we can, and to never forget that. Which is why Dogen emphasizes this idea of shoaku makusa, not to commit wrongs, and how important it is. Yeah, that's my sermon. I don't know if people got questions. I don't know if I got answers, but that's the thing I said, and I'm sticking with it because I said it and it's out there. What do we do next?
So as usual, we will do much of the digital hand raising has been working well. So under your participants window, there's a place where you can raise your hand, and then Brad can see whose hand has been raised, and then we'll go in just that order. So yeah, say whatever you like. You can ask questions, make comments. You gotta be a little aware of time and space, but also feel free to speak. That's the encouragement and the reminder. But yeah, that's really all there is to it. And if I go like, I don't have a digital hand raise, I might feel like this to be in the queue. If you can notice, remember.
Okay, I'll try to look up at you, because you're up in the corner of the screen, but you might move because people move around all the time on these screens.
That's true.
Okay, I see Mr. Craig French's digital hand up.
Yeah, Brett, I mean, I have to say, I've been listening to your Dharma talks for, 10 years now, and they're all great. But this one, this one was phenomenal and so timely, and I think, in so much it takes a lot of courage. I mean, I know you read a lot of what Dogen was saying in the Shijima's commentary, but even to address that, I feel like takes a lot of courage, and it's something that needs to be said, you know what I mean? And obviously I know it all starts with us and our practice, but just want to thank you for saying this, because it's important stuff, and it hit home for me personally, so thank you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think it's really significant, and I don't know, thank you for saying it was a good talk. I don't know if it was or not, but you sometimes feel like, I sometimes feel like I'm just kind of shouting into the air, and like that Simpsons meme of the old man yells at a cloud, and I think that's me sometimes yelling at a cloud. But I also feel like there is a deep connection. Somebody mentioned to me this study, I forget now the details, of these monkeys in one part of Japan, I think it was Japan, who started washing their potatoes, and then, I don't know, 1,000 miles distant, another group of monkeys simultaneously started washing their potatoes. And there's some sort of a story about this, about how people are influenced not just by what they hear physically and practically, but by something of what is just heard by anyone. And I think that's kind of the way we're working here. So there's 26 of us here, and that doesn't seem like much, but we need to do this thing. And when we think about Dogen, I was trying to figure out one time, and I asked Dan Layton, who's a better Dogen scholar than me, about this, how many people actually heard Dogen when Dogen was alive. And I said, do you think it was 50? Because that was my guess. And he said, I think it was probably less than 50, who either heard him or read his writings. When they say, occasionally in scholarly books about Dogen, they will say, such and such, like Genjo Koan was published in 1227. I don't know if it's 1227, but whatever. But they'll use the word publish. And that can give people the kind of false sense that it was, it was put out and it was in every Barnes and Nobles all over Japan, in the year 1227. But that's not the case at all. It was written, and it was made available to the few people who knew it existed on a certain day at a certain time. But how many of them actually read it or heard Dogen read it aloud was probably just a tiny group of people. And Japan in Dogen's time was a hot mess. If you ever want to really feel good about the times you're living in, despite all the things you're seeing on the news, read about medieval Japan. Particularly Dogen's era was one of the particularly bad eras of hundreds of years of bad times that were gone through. There were riots and insurrections and epidemics and earthquakes and wars. The country just before Dogen's birth had gone through this major war that killed thousands of people, and during his lifetime there was an earthquake and tsunami that killed an estimated 28,000 people. This was during Dogen's actual lifetime, and that was just one of the crappy things that was going on. And he has a funny trajectory in his life, because initially he was in what would have been at the time one of the larger cities in Japan, and then traveled to China, and then came back, and then ended up back in Kyoto, Kyoto being the capital at the time. The capital is now Tokyo, but Kyoto was the historical capital of Japan. And he made attempts for many years to teach in Kyoto, and later in the outskirts of Kyoto, but ultimately decided to leave. And I don't think took this decision lightly. I think he felt a very strong sense of mission, that he wanted to bring what he had learned in China from Tendo Nyojo, Rujing, his teacher, to the Japanese people, and that's probably why he went to Kyoto to try to do it. But after a while, he decided that a more sort of intensive, pure practice was necessary, and the only way that could be done in those days was to get out. So they went up to Echizen, which is now Fukui Prefecture, which is, even today, I visited Fukui when I was over there, and even today Fukui seems remote, even with cell phones and internet and everything else. It just feels like you're out in the boondocks. So to imagine what it felt like in the 1200s, it must have been like going to the moon or something. They really wanted to get away from the secular world and establish a pure practice, and they had to forego all the whatever sort of conveniences one had in the 1200s in terms of access to food and fuel for heating and water, and maybe water was available because you're in the mountains, but things like that, and make their own way. And he was invited at one point to come to Kamakura, which was at the time the sort of center of Buddhist learning, and the aristocrats who invited him to Kamakura were rather insistent on it. They really wanted him to come, and he refused. He made a trip there, which is one of the weird mysteries in Dogen, because there's not much record of what he did, but he went there for a couple of weeks and then came back, and there's a talk in Shobogenzo in which he's sort of apologizing to his monks for being away, and explaining to him that he's not gonna do that again. But he must have acquiesced to somebody's probably strong-arming him to go to Kamakura and talk. But there's no record of what he did there, and he never wrote it down. So he made a decision to get out of the secular world and to refuse it, and that's interesting to me lately, because I wonder if that might be necessary, and how to achieve such a thing in the contemporary society, because it's much more difficult to get away from things. But it's one of the reasons I'm turning off the news and everything, because it's a little micro way I can at least escape some of it for myself. Okay, Sarah Campbell.
Hey, Brad.
Hi.
Thanks. I agree. It was a really good talk, particularly good and particularly well timed. Obviously, given everything that's going on, and I think especially when you've got just to sort of the end, and the fact that doing the work is really difficult, and having the patience and the courage to just sit with what is going on for you and examine your motives and examine your feelings and stuff. And it really hit home. I was, before this, I went for a hike and I listened to a podcast it was the New York Times Daily podcast, and they had like a special dispatch from Minneapolis, which is a place where I spend a lot of time, and my sister lives like 2 miles from where the riots are going on and stuff. So the interviewer was interviewing the New York Times reporter who's on site in Minneapolis and who's reporting from the scene, and she said she's she kind of gave this like very calm recap of what happened with what's his name, George, blanking on his last name right now,
was it Floyd?
The killing last
yeah
in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And towards the end, the interviewer says something like, what do we do, or where do we go from here? And she said, I think that people really need to sit with their feelings and be honest about where we are right now.
Yeah.
And she said, and she got really emotional for a minute, and her voice got thick, and she stopped, and the interviewer said something like, well, it sounds like that's what you're doing. And she just said, there was like a beat, and she said, I strive for clarity. And she said, it was a really powerful thing to say, because she said she's covered Trayvon Martin and other racially charged, I think she's African American herself, but it just, to me, was such a powerful reminder of why we do this work and the impact that it can have, where it's like really understanding for your own self where you're coming from. If everyone does that, that's how we pave the way for people doing the right thing, instead of just acting and reacting in violence. And I mean, you're on Twitter. I know I'm on Twitter all the time. It's actually horrific, but it's also so helpful for understanding where the zeitgeist is. The narratives you see on Twitter for people rationalizing violence and acting. There's definitely a lot of like, this has been going on for so long. We have to be violent now and all that stuff. And it's really it's just disturbing and to see people fail to understand how destructive and why that's a bad idea. But your mind just starts to go to like, how can we get this under control? How can we cure this? And I can't think of anything better than this type of practice.
Yeah, it's all I can think of to do. And thank you for saying that. I think we have to learn something, and it's I'm reluctant to comment on anything. I post on Twitter now, but I rarely look at I do not look at any responses. Occasionally I accidentally see one, if I'm clicking the wrong button. But for 6 months or so, even longer than I turned off the news, I don't look at the responses. I just let them pile up. I don't care what people have to say. I just put a thing out there every once in a while. Because of what you say, because it's a lot of people rationalizing bad behavior. And the thing that always, when I see that, gets me is in my own practice, and this is going back a long time. There were a few moments when I was sitting, and I can clearly remember these times, in a retreat in usually Shizuoka, in this temple, in the quiet, after the just doing zazen for hours and hours as you do, and just watching my mind rationalize all the bad things I had ever done in the past. And at one moment it became just crystal clear that I could rationalize absolutely anything. I could, not those Nazis over there in 1930s, Germany, not those rioters over there in Minneapolis, not that police officer who murdered that guy, not those people that you always think of as being able to justify their bad actions, but me, me right here, was able to do that, could rationalize absolutely anything, and I mean without limit. Like, even the worst thing that a person could possibly think of to do, the most hurtful, violent, awful thing that a person could come up with to do, I, Brad Warner, sitting right there in that temple in Shizuoka, if I wanted to do that, I could make an excuse that would tidy everything up in a way that made it all neat. But the other thing I noticed, the sort of silver lining, is that I noticed no matter how well I made that excuse, I still wouldn't believe it. No matter how well I made that excuse, I still would not believe it. And I'll go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that we are all capable of this, and that we all know this. We all know this. And the idiots on Twitter who are typing their little excuses, they know it. They know that they're wrong. They absolutely know that they are wrong, but they've destroyed their ability to understand life to such an extent that this bullshit that they put out seems to make sense to them. And I just like to point out, whenever I can think of a way that seems clever enough, that it's not true. And, 2 people will give me a little heart for that if I do that, and everybody else fails to even notice that I've said anything at all. So that's the way that goes.
I think you just summed up Twitter, but yeah, I mean, keep doubting into the void. I don't think it's the void.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think Twitter in particular is kind of a forum for that kind of garbage. It's all the human garbage that we spew, and that you can just see it all. It's depressing. That's why the other thing I did before I got off Twitter is I unfollowed everybody except for UFO fanatics, and they'll argue among themselves about whether disclosure is about to happen or not, and whether we're going to get the truth finally. And that's kind of amusing to read, because they're always like, "Yep, next week, they're going to announce the aliens are real." And you go, you've been saying that for 28 years. It's funny. Anyway, so that's always funny to see. Okay, let's see. Bruce Linton is my next customer.
Thank you, Brad, for the Dharma talk. My son gave me a couple of years ago your book that came from Beyond Zen.
Oh.
I can't tell you how much. It was kind of why I showed up today. I'm kind of glad you're on Zoom. Thank you for that. And then I read, the Don't Be a Jerk, which I thought was great, and Hardcore Zen. So I appreciate those a lot, and so I wanted to have a chance to thank you personally. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm glad somebody liked them.
real contribution to kind of me and my own practice. But also, I kind of thought on some of the things you said today, you might have missed the mark a little bit. And it just comes out of my own practice. This is very personal, but I'd like to share a little of that with you, which is now that I've gotten older and, crossed the Dharma gate of 70, I can really look back and see oftentimes I didn't understand some of the things I was doing and the consequence of my actions. But, I think it's very helpful what you were saying that Dogen said. Well, you can always decide to do what's right.
Yeah.
And so this has 2 things. So one, avoid what is wrong and practice what is right. So there was a very short, good story with Dogen about that, where a guy, he's not a monk, but he's heard about Dogen. He's just a business guy, merchant in Osaka. And he's heard about Dogen, this great guy. So he makes this long hike all the way over to Eiji. and he asked to see Dogen, and kind of the guy says, well, let me ask him if he'll see you. And he says, yeah, come in so you can see Master Dogen. He comes in and says, Master Dogen, what's the most important thing in life? And Dogen looks at him and says, use good judgment. And he goes, Jesus, that's like so true. And he's walking down the hill and he's thinking, if I only use good judgment, get along with my wife so much better, my kids, the people I work with, I would be. And he goes, oh my gosh. Runs back up the hill and says, can I see Master Dogen one more time? He says, well, let me ask him. Dogen says, sure, come on. And he comes and says, Master Dogen, how do I get good judgment? He says, bad judgment. So, avoid what is wrong and practice what is right. We have to make room for our bad judgment. And that is why, when in Don't Be a Jerk, kind of your approach to the precepts is cool, because the precepts within Buddhist tradition, as I have learned them, they're precepts. They're what I vow that I want to be able to do. Not that I'm always capable of doing them.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to fail at times.
Yeah.
That's different than a commandment. In Judeo-Christian tradition, if you don't follow the commandment, you've sinned. In Buddhism, if I miss the mark, it's a precept, it's a vow, it's what I'm striving to become. So last point on this. So the way I integrate this in my own life and in my own work is sort of the difference between guilt and shame. And here's where I kind of rub up against you today and say, cautionary note, which is if you're not doing the right thing, you can feel very bad about yourself.
Yeah.
And with a certain amount of healthy guilt, which is good, right? Like, hey, I feel bad about this. I should learn from that. But there's some times where we feel bad about ourselves and we don't, instead of feeling we've disappointed or I haven't lived up to the precept or the vow, I could feel there's something wrong with me. And then that's shame. And to go around feeling like I should be ashamed of who I am because I didn't do something right or because I did make a very bad judgment or mistake, that's very difficult.
Yeah.
And so I think to make the distinction between avoiding what is wrong is a practice of learning over one's lifetime and not losing confidence in oneself that you can always, as Dogen say, make a turn and do something. And how it relates, and I'm in today's world, I think relates to what Sarah was touching on. About the terrible things that are happening in Minneapolis, that we are, like you were talking about the Nazis and the rioters, like we're all, that's us.
Yeah.
We're all those things. And we at any point can do what you were kind of edging us to look at, practice what is right, is to look and say, God, what's happening in Minnesota? What happened to George Floyd, and how we're dealing with that as a country? We can change.
Yeah.
That 100,000 people have died now because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we could change. We could do things differently.
Well, I hope so.
That's part of the underlying portion of this text.
Yeah.
It is not simply avoid what is wrong and practice what is right, but the process by what we discover what you're saying is where we have failed and where we need to change our course and be aware of that.
Yeah, and one of the things, thank you, one of the things that Dogen does say in there, and I'm not going to try to look it up and I'll try to do it from memory, is something like, even the thought that I committed what was not to be committed is also energy arising from the desire not to commit wrong. So, he kind of gives you an out for shame and guilt by saying even your shame and guilt is energy arising from the desire not to commit wrong. So even that is part of the process, and you have to kind of avoid wallowing in it, because that's also grabbing onto an image of self, which is, as you know, Buddhism is never about that. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brad.
And I see Kat Kilmer's digital hand up next.
Hi, I'll keep it short. I liked the passage that you read from Schrodinger that ended with saying that you can't view the totality of which you are from your perspective, from one limited perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that lining those things up with what Dogen is saying about how I appreciate that Dogen doesn't get into ethics. You know, he doesn't say this is right and this is wrong and this is right and this is wrong. He just says, you already know. You know. Everybody knows what's right and what's wrong. But I think if you're looking at it from that perspective of I can't experience the whole of totality of which I am with my brain, with my limited perspective, then that points to practice. That sitting, doing shikantaza is not using your limited perspective to experience the total of reality, and so therefore you may be able to find doing the right thing unavoidable.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the doing the right thing is not always easy, and there's always some sort of excuse or some sort of temptation there. I brought Kodo Sawaki this thing that's going to be published in October. He talks a lot about that, but I didn't have time to look up the various quotes. But he kind of talks about that, the fact that you don't. Zazen is the. Oh, sorry, I got distracted. But he talks about that idea himself, and you don't. I think practice is the only refuge that I have, to find this, and that idea of you can't see the totality is the nature of things. Dogen talks about that too. I thought it was, I don't know if Schrodinger ever read Dogen, but that sounds like a very Dogen-ish thing. He says something in Genjo Koan about one side is illuminated, the other is dark, is Dogen's line there. And when I first came across that, I had no idea what the hell that meant. It didn't mean anything to me the first time I read it. But after a while, I was like, "Oh, I get that. One side is illuminated, the other side is dark." So you don't know, but you can kind of develop a sense of it. And there are moments, I think, for a lot of practitioners where it breaks through for a second or two, and you kind of go, "Whoa, oh my God, that's all true," and that can light a fire under your ass, I think. not to pardon my French, as my parents used to say. Why French? The poor French. I see another digital hand up from Tom, who I think is just on my screen. Okay, there you are. There's a human. There was just a name there before.
Hi, thank you for your talk, Brad. Maybe you've already touched on it, right? My question is about what guidance does it offer for when you realise you have already committed wrongs, maybe whether they're old wrongs or more recent wrongs, or maybe even like immediately. And also, perhaps to touch on some of the other themes that came up. I know that I just wanted to share that Brooklyn Zen Center have meetings about like deconstructing like race and race relations, which people might be interested in, or maybe not. I don't know. Before I share that, thank you. And so my question's about what to do about my past wrongs.
What to do about, there's an interesting version of the precept that was the first version I heard, and then it took me a long time to find it again. And it's the precept that's usually translated as "don't speak of the faults of Buddhist practitioners and lay people," which sounds very sort of bland, and also, I don't know, certain reasons I don't like it that way, because that that means that if Buddhist practitioners and lay people do things that are wrong, you shouldn't say anything about it, which I think is not such a great attitude. But the version I first heard of it was totally different. It was no speaking of past mistakes, and I like that version better. No speaking of past mistakes, and it's kind of hard to relate it, but it means no speaking of past mistakes of anybody, of yourself, of anybody. So one of the things we do is, as I said in answer to the other question, is even the thought I did wrong in the past is energy arising from the desire not to do wrong now. What? I see a chat up here. Degenerated limbs. Wow, that's weird. So that's kind of what you do with that. And one of the things I think it's Shunryu Suzuki. It's some contemporary Zen teacher who I was reading years ago, said something like, when I sit Zazen, I'm just sitting and regretting my past mistakes sometimes. And I've had that experience too. And the best thing I've found to do with that is to let go of it, because regretting your past mistakes is usually a way of kind of trying to reaffirm your sense of permanent self, and grasp on to this sense of permanent self. And there is no permanent self. So if there was wrong done in the past, you have to just leave it where it is and move on, and do the right thing in this moment. Because Nishijima Roshi used to always say, the present moment is supremely important because it's the only chance you have to do the right thing. Once you've done something bad, it is carved into the universe. I use that phrase in my latest book. I actually wanted to call the book Carved into the Universe, but the publishers didn't like that title. But it was this idea that everything you do is carved into the universe. It's like there permanently. And so because there's all this stuff already carved into the universe, the best thing you can do now is just not to carve any more bad stuff into the universe. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
So usually we try to wrap up close to 12:30. Can you do a 5-minute warning on these last two hands and close
okay.
it?
5-minute warning. Okay. Wilcox. I see your digital hand. Oh, you're muted though.
There, I think I got it.
Okay, you got it.
Okay. Now the pressure's on. Thanks, Dave. So my inquiry is around the wrongdoing of non-action.
Yeah.
Like sometimes, and I realize that the individual rightness may be different for different people and their vows that they've taken and the choices that they've made in their life. But there are questions that are not so easy. I mean, would you commit violence to save another person's life? Would you commit violence to save your own life or your child's life? In those circumstances, and I don't ask this lightly. I grew up in a Quaker church, and it's a peace church, and so I grew up with that all my life. But we still had a thing called fighting Quakers.
Wow,
for real.
Sounds like a sports team.
Yeah, we need a jersey. But there's also that, Quakers also have a long history of social justice. And this, coming back to what the other gentleman brought up, is this past wrongs. It's really easy to sit back and be like, focus on my private practice. This is my thing, and this is my vows, and this is what I'm doing. But what about the communal practice and looking at the whole thing that's happening in society? That there were very real wrongs that are still institutionalized, systematized, systemic wrongs for people. And we can't just ask them to just sit back and be good. I don't know. Those are some of the struggles inside me, and so I'm just.
Yeah, I can only answer for myself, and for myself, I feel like the things that come into my immediate orbit are the ones that I have to deal with. And it kind of all goes back, and this, I don't know, this might sound tangential to what you're bringing up, but I think it's related. It was something Nishijima Roshi told me when I was having a lot of difficulty at the company I worked for. And the company, I really cared about this company back in Japan that I worked for, but they were, there was a ship that was sinking in a lot of ways, and actually I was right, it sort of did sink. And I wanted to try to do something about it. And he said something like, you can help a little. And that, even though that was based on that specific incident, I find that it's relevant to even bigger world incidents like this. I can help a little by how I relate to the people who come into my orbit, but I can't right injustices that have been done hundreds of years ago, or even right the kind of weird way those injustices are being spun for commercial gain and causing problems that way too. There's not that much I can do about that. And so I'm going to try to find the field in which I can have some kind of minor impact. And it's usually nothing anyone notices. It's just this little thing that I do to try to make this little bit that I'm involved in right. And the larger picture, I just have to make my contributions to it the best I can. And sometimes it's not, you get criticized for it because there's the things that they want you to do. If you haven't put this hashtag on your feed, then you are not helping. And I go, really? And I think, okay, well, how about I be the person who is deeply concerned with all of that stuff, but doesn't express his concern in that standard way, and maybe thereby influence other people who don't like to be told that they must do this thing, to not say, well, screw it, I'm just not gonna care about this stuff, but rather, care about this stuff in a different way and try to make it move in a different way and see if that helps. Something like that.
Yeah, I get that your way is right for you, and that's sincere, and I think that's awesome. I'm just hoping that each person does their personal inquiry to find what is their right way.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's all we can do. And I think following a kind of standardized right way never really works. Anyway, you just have to kind of find your own right way. Okay, now we've gone over time. Martin Ballard. Where are you? Oh, you're muted. You're muted. So, okay. There you go.
Back to secular versus Buddhist, and it seems to me that, the secular world not merely forgives things that the Buddhist life does not, it rewards. Look at the DSM-6 description of narcissistic personality disorder. Yeah. And it's a playbook for how to succeed.
Yeah.
And I feel it's funny. I was listening to a talk, and I love Dogen, and it seems to me that it's like crazy compassion is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It seems like he's advising us, if we stay in refuge, refrain from doing harm, the good will kind of follow. And but as I've been practicing a pretty long time, and I think maybe I'm just starting to get a collar on my on the id kid. So I just used to intervene in all sorts of stuff I had no business business intervening in. And the moral, I mean, I just think our concepts of right and wrong frequently are concepts, and these actions and distinctions and everything maybe kind of come from a different place, because in the conventional world, it's never all going to add up.
Yeah.
And the best thing anybody ever told me, I think, was do not try to fix samsara.
Yeah.
You'll just beat your head open.
Well, that's it. I mean, you can't fix samsara, and there's a certain. I mean, I'm always reluctant to invoke the idea of karma, but I tend to believe in it, and I think there's a kind of collective karma that happens, and then there's individual karma that happens, and everybody's kind of got to deal with the thing that they've dealt with, that they've kind of created for themselves. You've created. This is the part where people freak out if you say it, so I'm going to say it quietly. But you kind of create this world for yourself even before you're born into it. And then you're born into it, and then you go, oh my God, I didn't create this. And for me, it's been useful to go, oh yeah, I think I did create this. I think I did put all this stuff here, and if any of it's not good, I can't really blame anybody else. And that's the part where everybody freaks out. But for me, that view of the world has been the only thing that's made me able to sanely process a lot of things without kind of going crazy and getting too upset about it, is to go, yeah, I kind of put this into play, and now I'm kind of reaping what I have personally sown. And if I want to make it better, I'm the one who has to make it better, and I can't appeal to it should have been better, or that shouldn't have happened, or those people shouldn't have done the thing they did, or history should have been different, or my parents should never have had children because they knew they had a 50% chance of passing on one of the most horrible diseases known to man to their children. Things that used to go through my head in the past. I had to stop that and go, oh, maybe I was born into this. Maybe I'm the reason that I have a 50% chance of inheriting one of the worst diseases known to man. For example, that's my favorite go-to example. Yeah, something like that.